Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching Feels Good Man, a fascinating film by two filmmakers I have with me today, and it's a pleasure to speak to them. We're going to be speaking with Arthur Jones and with Giorgio Angelini. They are the filmmakers behind Feels Good Man. Now, Feels Good Man premiered at Sundance in 2020. And it won a U.S. Sundance 2020 Emerging Filmmakers Award. I think if you enjoyed it as much as I did, you understand why it did. So I just have a million questions. We don't have time for a million questions. But, this is a really fascinating phenomenon. The story that you two tell in this film is centered around one artist and the way that his innocent work was twisted, corrupted, taken, reused, redistributed, repurposed into something completely different, something completely alien to the way he thinks, the way he lives, and what he values. And I think a lot of us had heard bits and pieces of this story as Pepe the Frog became a ubiquitous symbol in 2016. Well, here we are in 2020, and the people who were circulating Pepe the Frog seem louder, bolder. They seem to have come out of their computers. They seem to have invaded our streets, and they seem to be carrying weapons. So it's a different story now. When did you start this project? What sparked your curiosity to do this project? And what were your assumptions when you started the project?
What motivated the project initially was my relationship with Matt Fury, both the cartoonist and his cartoons. I had been a fan of his comic books like back when he was drawing them in the mid-2000s. I'm a cartoonist. I'm an illustrator by background. And so initially what drew me to the story was, when I would see Pepe on these message boards, being a fan of Boys Club from back in the day, I had sort of always felt like Pepe was lost. I had this palpable sense of like, oh no, where did Pepe go? And then obviously sort of in the post-Charlottesville, moment, the death of Heather Heyer, there was a real urgency that I think both Giorgio and I felt as artists and filmmakers and collaborators to make something about the cultural moment that we thought would maybe cut through some of the static that was going on during that moment. That was also a very clear moment where the alt-right was shifting. Before Charlottesville, the alt-right meant sort of, as one of our experts in the film said in a clip we didn't use, he said it was a grab bag of contending notions. After Charlottesville, the alt-right pretty much just meant white supremacy, white nationalists. And so we wanted to make a film about how we really draw the line between online message board trolling and trolling in the mainstream.
Right.
And so that was our kind of like hope for the project when it started. And then as we were working on this film starting in 2017, we learned so many different things. So many different things about these online communities and also so many different things about Matt Fury, the artist, because he was sort of stepping into the spotlight as we were shooting this and trying to enforce his copyright against all of these agent provocateurs in culture. People like Richard Spencer and Alex Jones. So, that's kind of the action in the film in Act 2 and Act 3.
Now, Matt's position toward Pepe changes over the film. His attempts to cope with this phenomenon changes over the film, right? At the beginning, he's somewhat passive. He hopes it'll dissipate. He's somewhat amused, but troubled as well. And he sees that there's a proliferation of uses, some of which are much more toxic than others. But then by the time he starts seeing people like Alex Jones use it, and he starts seeing people trying to make money off of it, some very noxious people making money off of it, he changes his strategy. At that point, he ceases becoming purely the easygoing guy who worked in the thrift store and did this comic book out of love. and now he's making a stand. Like, as you got to know Matt throughout this, how did that change come about?
I mean, I think both of us understood early on that like Matt was going to make a really compelling protagonist for the film, not just because his story is incredibly unique, also because his own personal journey is kind of all of our journeys, right? I think for a lot of people, that cultural moment in 2016 felt like it came out of nowhere. And I think especially from a media literacy perspective, since that seems to be like your background, Arthur and I were really interested in understanding how these kinds of provocateurs and trolls and agents of chaos online were kind of manipulating the systems of media to basically promote their own agenda. And we've seen it like transform to something much bigger by today, but like part of Matt's experience and learning all this and like kind of getting off the proverbial couch and like getting up to do something about it is kind of what we hope a lot of people will take away from it in their own kind of personal lives and how they engage online and how the kind of media that they consume and like just making them sharper, more critical minds.
Well, certainly back in 2014, 15, and even 16, the people in my field of study who work on things like internet memes and troll culture, the people who studied 4chan, 8chan, Anonymous, you know, they were pretty convinced, not necessarily that these people were harmless, because they certainly caused harm within their communities, but they didn't seem to have an outlet that took their expressions far beyond their message boards, right? They would occasionally leak out their modes of expression would leak out onto YouTube or onto Facebook or onto Twitter. But for the most part, this was a fringe culture that first adopted Pepe and then twisted Pepe into this other thing. I think we all, as you said, we all were shaken out of those assumptions when we saw people wearing Pepe pins in the street or carrying Pepe flags in the streets and chanting at Trump rallies. And that certainly became a different thing. Now, at what point did you decide to do this film? Like, what was the point at which you decide? What point in the last 4 years did you decide this had to happen?
I started researching the film, you know, in the spring of 2017, and then started actually filming the core interviews of Matt and his friends in November of 2017. And, you know, we kind of always knew there would be an A plot to the movie and a B plot to the movie. The A plot to the movie was going to be Matt and, you know, the story about him as an artist and his artist journey. And then the B story was going to be this larger story about how social media and the internet has affected the way in which we all communicate for the negative. And so when I had sort of like covered the first part of that with those initial interviews, and then Giorgio was making a film called Owned, A Tale of Two Americas. As I was beginning this process, he was finishing that film as I was beginning my research process, and I was animating some sections of that film for him. And we were just having really great discussions. And I figured like Giorgio would really be kind of the right collaborator to come in and bring some of these larger ideas from the cultural sphere into the film. So Giorgio, do you have anything to add to
that? Thank you for bringing me in. It's been a big journey, a huge exploration for myself. But yeah, I think, we started at the end of 2017, early 2018. And honestly, like for a documentary film, it's been a pretty quick turnaround, in part because the story just naturally gave us its ending, which is great for a documentary because oftentimes it's really hard to know when to finish your story. But also we just knew the film had to come out before the election because like we mentioned before, like part of the mission of the film is really something about media literacy, and getting it out before this election was super critical to us. So here we are.
Any story that ends with Alex Jones writing a big check is a good story, right? So Giorgio, Giorgio, how would you describe the complementary talents and duties that you and Arthur brought to this film? Like what what do you do better? What does Arthur do better? And how did that work into the creation of the film?
Well, first of all, I don't know how to animate. So Arthur, like, that was another sort of big thing about from the beginning that Arthur and I talked about, which was the opportunity that this film afforded in terms of just creating something unique within the world of documentary filmmaking. So both of us, I think, share a desire to always make things that stand out in their own kind of category. And something about this film really lent itself to that. So obviously Arthur is an animator and a very talented one at that, but I think, you know, he's a really dogged researcher and on the journalistic side. And like, it's just a good collaboration. Also, like, we were both intensely interested in the story, but also in very different ways. So like, we were kind of coming together on a daily basis with our own perspectives and then kind of figuring out how to like enmesh them. I did a lot of the filming as well, like cinematography, and also contributed to some of the music because my background initially back in the day was touring musician. And in fact, the last time I was in Charlottesville was when I was touring in bands. So I wish I could be there now, but
yeah. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, having a sense of humor throughout it all must have been really essential because you are dealing with some really dark stuff. I mean, you're dealing with some of the most troubling and threatening parts of the American condition right now. And even though the story you're telling is one of something cute and dear and charming being co-opted and kidnapped by these darkest forces. So how did you keep a spirit through this? And how did Matt keep a spirit through this? You know, he seems to be so evenly keeled throughout it, even when he decides to take action. His voice, his expression seems pretty even keeled.
Yeah, I mean, Matt's a low-key guy. He has a little bit of a party streak, but for the most part, he's a low-key guy. So even when he's kind of saying something hilarious, he's often saying it in a way that feels kind of grave or something. Yeah. And that was always something that was interesting in the edit. You know, but I also think there's a kind of wisdom that he sort of offhandedly is always able to kind of give you, like unique turns of phrases and stuff like that. But we did understand that like Matt was this unique guy who, you know, like Giorgio had said, was like a really good protagonist for us because people could kind of project their own experiences onto him. And people often wonder like, oh man, if that had happened to me, what would I have done? Would I have done this? Would I have done that? What would I have done differently? But this is a totally unique circumstance to a totally unique artist. We were able to keep our humor a lot because, I mean, I think Giorgio is like a naturally very like upbeat, optimistic, problem-solving sort of guy. I think this was something where I was just like uniquely obsessed with the story. I felt like the story was going to be important, and I thought the reason it was going to be important was because we could tell it with a real sense of like irreverence. And that was something that we always really kind of wanted to do because we wanted the film to feel authentic, both to like people who've never heard of this story and then also people who maybe grew up on these message boards.
Well, and irreverence is like the sweet form of irreverence is what sparks Matt's work in the first place, right? And then
Correct.
The hostile, bitter form of irreverence takes it over. Did you sense there was a fine line there? Did you meet people along the way who didn't seem to appreciate there was a line when it crossed from sweetness into cruelty?
I mean, there were a lot of people. Yeah, go ahead, Giorgio.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I think certainly that's a huge part of the story, right? Is like people who feel like they're participating in a kind of trolley online activity that in their minds is purely innocent and just for the lulz, as they might say, not understanding the kind of greater context in which they're working. And also like in some cases that, you know, the joke sometimes becomes real, right? Like you'll see today in comments, like on our YouTube page for our trailer, you'll see people who still maintain like, I can't believe you guys fell for the joke. And like, we're just trolling you. And it's like, yeah, maybe, but also actual professional racists like identify with the hate symbol, you know, it's like, so it's a lot more complicated than I think people let on.
Yeah. What's Matt doing? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
So what's Matt doing next? How is he bounced off of this experience? There was a moment in the film when he seems to have lost his will to create, his edge. He seemed to have gotten it back a bit by the end when he decides to take on some of these forces. Like, what is he up to now, and how does he hope to cope with this going forward?
This is a process for Matt. I think his feelings about Pepe and the situation change a lot. I know that he's been more productive in the past than he is right now. It's something that, like he says towards the end of the film, he says this is something that he's going to be struggling with for the rest of his life. And so, he does have it is one of the nice things about this movie coming out right now is Matt is able to publish an art book. That's none of the Boys Club comics, and it's called Mind Viscosity. So if you happen to like some of the full color things in the film, I'd encourage you to seek that book out on Fantagraphic Books. I think Matt is really hoping, at the end of this film, since this is taking place after everyone has seen it, so there's spoilers. At the end, Pepe swims away into a peaceful place, and that's a poetic choice on our part as filmmakers. And it's also what we hope might be a little moment of wish fulfillment, both for us as a culture to recognize and understand how this stuff negatively impacts us, and also for Matt, that he can kind of let go of all of this negativity of Pepe and let him sort of like swim off and separate himself from that, so that Matt can kind of recreate who he is, both as an artist, as a man, separate from all this stuff. So, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that Matt has like complicated feelings about Pepe that change every day.
Yeah. What about for you two? What's next for you two? Do you plan to continue this partnership? Do you have separate projects in the works? Were you inspired by this sort of hybrid animated documentary form? There aren't a lot of precedents for an animated documentary, a quasi-animated documentary.
We have a company that we call Ready Fictions, and we're taking this film out as self-distribution, and we started making this film in a very DIY way, and we're taking it to market in a very DIY way. Yeah. And so it's been like a pretty amazing collaboration, just in terms of all the different things we've had to learn and the different hats that each of us have had to wear. So, we're both excited to tell stories about how art and politics converge in surprising ways. And we're also like artists that are, we're interdisciplinary. So like Giorgio is actually an architect by trade, and I'm a designer. And, I think the projects we go forward working on together, who knows what shape they'll take, honestly. So.
Well, that's inspiring and exciting, and I hope that your next project comes through Charlottesville, and I hope that when it does, human beings can visit Charlottesville without fear of spreading infection, and we can all be together in one room. In the meantime, please stay well, and I hope everyone you're close to stays well. And I wish you the best of luck with this film. I think it's a really important film. It's extremely well done. It's extremely entertaining, even though it is about some dark stuff. And I can tell you, as someone who lives in Charlottesville and was here in August of 2017, it's hard to revisit those people and those movements. And to have it presented with such a lovely touch, with a motivation based on the fact that there are good people in this story somewhere, meant quite a bit to me. And I think it's going to go over very well here in Charlottesville for some time. So Giorgio and Arthur, thank you again for spending time with us, and thank you for making this film.
Thank you so much. Those are really powerful words at the end. If I could just add real quick, because your words inspired me to just mention this too. It's like this film is really about a celebration of love and empathy, and a reminder that people don't have to feel like the internet is controlling them or shaming them out of their capacity for empathy and understanding. And I feel like we're at a moment now where social media is basically built on a platform of dividing us and keeping us engaged through the kind of most divisive tactics. And we should resist that urge. And I hope this film re-engages people to understand that there's another path forward.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you again, and best of luck with everything.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. See you soon.
Yep.